Properties of equality are math rules that help us solve equations. Basically, what you do to one side of the equal sign, you must do to the other. We are going to complete a few examples. Let's look at example A. This is the equation x minus 3 equals negative 5. To get x by itself, we want to move whatever is on that side of the equal sign away so that only x remains. So it's x minus 3. So this is subtracting 3. The inverse, also considered the opposite, of subtracting is addition. So to move the minus 3, we want to add 3. So we have to do it to both sides. So we add 3 on the left, negative 3 plus 3 is 0, so that just leaves us with x. And on the right-hand side, we add 3, negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. So x equals negative 2 is our answer. Now it also says to justify each step. That means tell which property of equality you used. They are referring to these properties. So since we added 3 to both sides, we use the addition property of equality. Let's try another example. Here we have 0.9 equals y plus 2.8. So to get y by itself, you're going to need to move the plus 2.8. The inverse of addition is subtraction, so we're going to subtract 2.8. But remember, what we do to one side of the equal sign, we must do to the other. So we get negative 1.9 equals y. That's our answer, but we still have to justify our step. We subtracted 2.8, so that means we use the subtraction property of equality. Now I'm going to have you try example F. So go ahead and identify what your variable is and get it by itself using one of the properties of equality. Make sure to also justify each step. Okay, so 1.3 is multiplying times z, so the inverse of multiplication is division, so we will divide by 1.3 on both sides of the equal sign. We get z equals 4, and since we divided, we use the division property of equality. Let's go ahead and jump back to example C and try a little bit of a trickier one. So why C is trickier is because it has a negative and it has a 5. You can do this two ways. The first way is you can just move the negative down by the 5. So it says n divided by negative 5 equals negative 3. That negative can go on the top or the bottom at any time. You can move it whichever place you prefer. So now it's n divided by negative 5 equals negative 3. So the inverse of division is multiplication. So to get n by itself, we can multiply times negative 5, but what we do to one side of the equal sign, we have to do to the other. So we end up with n equals negative 3 times negative 5 is positive 15. So in that case, we use the multiplication property of equality. Now another way that we could also solve this equation is to think of it instead as just an n, put a 1 in front. Think of it as 1n right here. So that would be the same as negative 1n over 5 equals negative 3. So another thing you can do is multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal is where you flip the fraction. So the denominator goes to the numerator and the numerator goes to the denominator. So the inverse is 5 over negative 1. That's your reciprocal. So if you multiply on one side by 5 over negative 1, you have to on the other side. How this works is negative 1 over negative 1 is 1, so we don't have to write just a 1. And 5 over 5 is 1. So it leaves us with just n. On this side, negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. Divided by negative 1 is positive 15. And we multiplied by the reciprocal, so we multiplied on both sides. So if you solve it in that form, it'd be the multiplication property of equality. Before we end this example, I do want to make sure that we cover something with a pi in it. So let's look at example G. It says pi x equals negative 2 pi. Remember, pi is a number, x is a variable. So we want to get the x by itself. It's multiplying times pi. So the inverse of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide both sides by pi. Pi over pi is 1. So you just have 1x, but we don't have to write a 1. We can just write x. On the right side, negative 2 pi divided by pi. The pi's simplify out to 1, so you're just left with negative 2. Because pi over pi is 1, and negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. So when you think of them canceling out, they're not really just canceling, they are simplifying down to 1. And since we don't have to write 1, that is what makes it kind of seem like it disappears. One other tip I have for you is, if you're struggling to remember to do the action on both sides of the equal sign, you can always draw a line down the equal sign so that you remember, okay, if I did it to the left side of the line, I had to do it to the right. And that is just a way as we get into more complicated problems to help you keep track of all of your steps.